The wine glass hit the table with a sharp clink that cut through the dinner party chatter like a blade through silk. My wife Marta stood there, swaying slightly, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around the stem of her glass, as she prepared to deliver what would become the most expensive toast of her life. "I'd like to make a toast," she announced, her voice carrying that particular blend of alcohol and arrogance that I'd grown to despise over our 23 years of marriage. The conversation around our dining room table died instantly. 8 faces turned toward her, including mine, though I already sensed disaster approaching like a freight train in the distance. "My name is David Monroe, and I'm a forensic accountant. That means I spend my days following money trails, uncovering financial deceptions, and exposing lies that people think they've buried deep enough to stay hidden forever. It's ironic, really, considering how long it took me to see the deception happening right under my own roof." Marta raised her glass higher, her emerald bracelet catching the light from our chandelier. The bracelet I'd never seen before tonight. The bracelet that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "To my dear husband David," she continued, her voice dripping with mock affection. "The man who pays all the bills but never learned how to satisfy a woman in bed." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, could hear someone's sharp intake of breath, could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs like a caged animal desperate to escape. Our guests sat frozen. There was Greg Waters, Marta's business partner at the advertising agency, his face a mask of barely concealed amusement. His wife Susan looked mortified, her cheeks flushing red as she stared down at her untouched dessert. My daughter Amelia, home from college for the weekend, had gone pale as paper. My son Ross shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his jaw clenched tight. Then there were Marta's enablers, her sister Victoria, who'd been encouraging Marta's increasingly erratic behavior for months. Jake Morrison from the agency, who always seemed to cover for Marta's long absences. And Danny Fletcher, Marta's so-called best friend who'd been feeding her a steady diet of "you deserve better" for years. I felt every eye in the room on me, waiting for my reaction, waiting to see if I'd explode, if I'd crumble, if I'd storm out like a wounded animal. Instead, I did something that surprised even myself. I smiled. "Well," I said, setting down my own wine glass with deliberate care, "happy to be of service, darling. Though I have to say, for someone who's supposedly unsatisfied, you certainly seem to be getting your needs met somewhere." The temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. Marta's confident smirk faltered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. "What's that supposed to mean?" she demanded. "Oh, nothing specific," I replied, my voice as calm as a lake before a storm. "Just an observation from someone who's spent the last 6 months wondering why his wife comes home at 2 a.m, smelling like another man's cologne." Greg Waters choked on his wine. Susan's head snapped up, her eyes darting between her husband and my wife. Victoria tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out strangled and false. "David, you're being ridiculous," Marta said, but I could see the panic flickering behind her eyes now. "I work late. You know that." "I do know that," I agreed. "I also know that the Marriott downtown charges $230 for their executive suites. I know because I've been getting the credit card statements." The lie came so easily, so naturally, that even I was impressed. The truth was I'd been suspicious for months, but I hadn't found any hotel charges yet. But Marta's face went white, and Greg suddenly became very interested in his napkin. "I think we should go," Susan Waters said quietly, pushing back from the table. "This seems like a private matter." "No, please stay," I said, standing up and raising my own glass. "I'd like to make a toast of my own." Marta sat down heavily, her earlier bravado evaporating like steam. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice maker cycling in the kitchen. "To my wife Marta," I began, looking directly at her, "who taught me that the most expensive education you can get is discovering who someone really is after you've already married them. And to new beginnings." I drained my glass in one long swallow, set it down, and walked out of the dining room, leaving behind 8 stunned faces and the wreckage of what used to be my marriage. In my study, I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, my hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. Through the door, I could hear the awkward sounds of our guests making their excuses and leaving. Car doors slamming in the driveway. Engines starting. The front door closing with unusual force. I walked to my desk and opened the bottom drawer, pulling out a manila folder I'd been keeping there for the past 3 weeks. Inside were printed emails, credit card statements, and photographs that my friend Trent had helped me obtain through his security consulting business. Nothing illegal, just careful observation and public records. The photos were particularly interesting. Marta and Greg having lunch at restaurants across town. Marta and Greg entering the same downtown office building, where Greg kept a private apartment. Marta and Greg kissing in the parking garage of her office building at 11:30 on a Tuesday night when she'd told me she was working late on the Henderson account. I'd been planning to confront her privately, maybe suggest marriage counseling, try to salvage what was left of our relationship for the sake of our kids and our shared history. But that toast changed everything. That public humiliation, delivered with such casual cruelty in front of our children and friends, had burned away any lingering sentiment I might have felt. Now I was going to do what I did best: follow the money, uncover the deception, and expose every lie she thought she'd hidden. My phone buzzed with a text from Trent. Saw the cars leaving early. Everything okay? I typed back, game on. Trent Morrison had been my best friend since college, and after 20 years as a cop followed by 5 years running his own security consulting firm, he knew how to dig up information that most people preferred to keep buried. More importantly, he knew how to do it legally. We met at Mickey's Diner the next morning, a greasy spoon downtown that served coffee strong enough to wake the dead and minded its own business. Trent slid into the booth across from me, his weathered face creased with concern. "You look like heck," he said by way of greeting. "Feel worse," I admitted, wrapping my hands around my coffee mug for warmth. "She kicked me out of the bedroom last night, said I embarrassed her in front of our friends." "Her friends," Trent corrected, "and she embarrassed herself. What she said to you was way over the line, Dave, even for her." Marta had never been Trent's favorite person. He'd been the best man at our wedding, but over the years he'd watched her gradual transformation from the ambitious but caring woman I'd married into someone harder, more selfish, more entitled. He'd bitten his tongue for the sake of our friendship, but I could see the relief in his eyes now that the facade was finally cracking. "So what's the plan?" he asked. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos he'd taken. "I want to know everything. How long it's been going on, where they go, what they do, how much money she's spending on this affair. I want documentation that will hold up in divorce court." "You sure about this? Once we go down this road, there's no going back." "She made that choice for me last night," I said. "I'm done being the fool who pays the bills while she plays house with her business partner." Trent nodded slowly. "Okay, but we do this right. Everything legal, everything documented, everything admissible. I've got a contact at a private investigation firm, a woman named Lila Stein. She's ex-FBI, specializes in domestic cases. Discreet, thorough, and she knows how to testify in court. Set it up." We spent the next hour going over what I knew and what I suspected. The late nights that had become routine over the past 8 months, the new clothes, the expensive jewelry, the sudden interest in working out and getting her hair done twice a week. The way she'd started picking fights with me over trivial things, as if she was trying to justify something to herself. "Classic pattern," Trent observed. "She's trying to rewrite history, make you the bad guy so she doesn't have to feel guilty about what she's doing." "Is it working?" I asked. "On who? You?" "Heck no. You're one of the most decent guys I know." "On her, probably. People are really good at lying to themselves when they want something badly enough." After breakfast, we drove to Lila Stein's office in a converted warehouse downtown. She was a small, sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of direct stare that probably made criminals confess just to get her to look away. "Mr. Monroe," she said, shaking my hand with a grip that could crack walnuts. Trent filled me in on the basics. "Before we go any further, I need you to understand something. I'm not here to save your marriage. I'm here to document the truth, whatever that turns out to be. Sometimes the truth is worse than people expect. Sometimes it's not as bad, but it's always expensive and it's always painful. Are you prepared for that?" "I'm prepared," I said. "Good. Then let's talk about what you want to accomplish." I laid out my goals. I wanted proof of the affair for divorce proceedings. I wanted to know if Marta was using marital assets to fund her relationship with Greg. I wanted to know if there were other men, other affairs I didn't know about. And I wanted to know if Greg was planning to leave his wife, or if Marta was just a side piece he was using for entertainment. "That last one might be the most important," Lila noted. "If she thinks she's going to end up with him and his money, She might be more aggressive about the divorce. If she realizes she's just a fling, she might try to reconcile. I don't want to reconcile, I said firmly. You say that now, but 23 years of marriage is a long time. You might change your mind when you see what divorce is going to cost you. What's it going to cost me to stay married to someone who humiliates me in public and sleeps with other men? Lila smiled for the first time since we'd walked into her office. Fair point. Okay, Mr. Monroe, let's get to work. Over the next 2 weeks, Lila and her team put together a surveillance operation that would have impressed the FBI. They followed Marta to restaurants, hotels, and Greg's private apartment. They documented her schedule, photographed her meetings, and even managed to get audio recordings of some of their conversations using long-range listening equipment from public spaces. The evidence was damning. Not only was Marta having an affair with Greg, but she was also using our joint credit cards to pay for hotels, dinners, and gifts for him. She'd bought him a $1,500 watch for his birthday. She'd charged romantic weekend getaways to our account. She was essentially making me pay for my own humiliation. But the most interesting discovery came when Lila ran a deeper background check on Greg Waters. It turned out he wasn't quite the successful businessman he pretended to be. His advertising agency was heavily in debt. He'd been borrowing against his house to keep it afloat, and he was being investigated by the state licensing board for some questionable billing practices. He's broke, Lila explained, spreading financial documents across her desk. Worse than broke. He's leveraged up to his eyeballs and barely staying ahead of his creditors. My guess is he's been using company funds to maintain his lifestyle, and that's going to catch up with him soon. So he's using Marta. Looks like it. She's paying for everything, and he's probably telling her it's temporary, just until his cash flow improves. Classic con man behavior. Does she know? Hard to say. People see what they want to see, especially when they're in love, or think they are. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Amelia called me at work on a Thursday afternoon, her voice tight with anger. Dad, you need to know something about Mom. What is it, honey? I came home early from class yesterday to do laundry, and she was here with that guy, Greg. They were in your bedroom, Dad. In your bed. The rage that swept through me was so intense, I had to grip the edge of my desk to keep from throwing my computer across the room. Bad enough that she was cheating on me. Bad enough that she was spending our money on her lover. But bringing him into our house, into our bedroom, while our daughter could walk in at any moment? That crossed a line I didn't even know existed. Are you okay? I asked Amelia. No, I'm not okay. I'm furious. How could she do this to you, to us? I don't know, sweetheart, but I'm going to make sure it stops. That night, I called a meeting with my lawyer, my accountant, and Lila Stein. It was time to move from investigation to action. My lawyer, Patricia Hendricks, had been handling corporate litigation for 25 years before she moved into family law. She was the kind of attorney who smiled sweetly while she destroyed opposing counsel's arguments with surgical precision. This is good, she said, reviewing Lila's evidence file. Very good. The financial records alone are enough to establish adultery and misuse of marital assets. The photographs and audio recordings just make it bulletproof. What's my next move? I asked. That depends on what you want to accomplish. Do you want to try to shock her into ending the affair and attempting reconciliation? Or do you want to go nuclear and file for divorce immediately? I thought about Marta's toast, about finding Greg in my bedroom, about the 8 months of lies and deception and stolen money. Nuclear, I said. Patricia nodded approvingly. Then we need to move fast and hit hard. File for divorce, request temporary exclusive use of the marital home, freeze the joint accounts, and demand immediate spousal support from her to you based on her adultery. Can we do that? In this state, absolutely. Adultery is still grounds for divorce, and the court takes a dim view of spouses who use marital assets to fund their extramarital relationships. Plus, you've been the primary breadwinner throughout the marriage. She's going to owe you. The irony was delicious. Marta, who'd spent months spending our money on her lover while treating me like a walking ATM, was about to find out what real financial consequences looked like. But I wanted more than just a favorable divorce settlement. I wanted her to feel the same humiliation she'd put me through. I wanted her friends to see who she really was. I wanted Greg to understand that his actions had consequences. That's when Trent suggested we get creative. The agency's having their annual client appreciation party next Friday, he said. Big event, all their major clients, lots of important people in the community. Marta's supposed to give a presentation about their new marketing campaign. So, what if her presentation got a little enhanced? Lila looked up from her laptop. What kind of enhancement are we talking about? Trent grinned. The kind that involves accidentally replacing her presentation slides with some of the more interesting photographs from our surveillance. I started to object, then stopped. Why should I object? She'd humiliated me in front of our friends and family. Why shouldn't she get a taste of her own medicine? It's risky, Patricia warned. Could be seen as vindictive in divorce proceedings. Could also be seen as justifiable payback for months of emotional misuse and financial theft, Lila countered. Depends on how it's presented. I made my decision. Do it. The next week was a flurry of preparation. Patricia filed the divorce papers, but held off on serving them until after the party. Lila's team planted a small device in Marta's laptop that would allow Trent to remotely access her presentation. I opened new bank accounts and quietly began moving my personal assets out of our joint accounts. Meanwhile, I played the part of the oblivious husband. I was polite to Marta, even helpful, offering to attend her big presentation to show my support. She seemed surprised by my sudden change in attitude, but she was too focused on her event to question it too deeply. You don't have to come, she said on Thursday night. It's going to be pretty boring, just work stuff. I want to be there, I insisted. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. The lie came easily now. I was getting good at deception, learning from the master. Friday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for October. The agency had rented the ballroom at the Marriott downtown, the same hotel where Marta and Greg had been conducting their afternoon rendezvous. The irony wasn't lost on me. I arrived early, wearing my best suit and carrying a bouquet of roses for my wife, the picture of a supportive husband. Trent was already there, posing as a member of the catering staff thanks to a favor from a friend who owned the company. Lila sat at the bar, nursing a martini and looking like just another client. The room filled up quickly. About 200 people, including the mayor, several city council members, and executives from some of the biggest companies in town. Marta worked the room like a politician, shaking hands and making small talk, with Greg always somewhere nearby. I made my own rounds, introducing myself to people I'd never met, playing the proud husband role to perfection. Several people commented on what a lovely couple Marta and I made. How lucky I was to have such a successful wife. I smiled and agreed with them, knowing that in about 30 minutes, their opinion would change dramatically. At 8 o'clock, the formal program began. Greg took the stage first, welcoming everyone and introducing the agency's new campaign. He was smooth, confident, completely unaware that his world was about to implode. And now, he said, I'd like to introduce our creative director, the brilliant mind behind this innovative campaign, Marta Munro. The applause was enthusiastic as Marta took the stage. She looked beautiful under the lights, confident and professional in her black dress and pearls. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for what was about to happen. Almost. Thank you all for being here tonight, she began, clicking her remote to advance to the first slide. I'm excited to share with you our new approach to integrated marketing. The first few slides went normally. Charts and graphs, marketing buzzwords, polite nods from the audience. I could see Trent in the back of the room, his finger poised over his phone. Then Marta clicked to slide 7, and everything changed. Instead of a pie chart showing demographic breakdowns, the screen filled with a high-resolution photograph of Marta and Greg kissing passionately in the parking garage of their office building. The timestamp in the corner showed it had been taken 3 weeks ago at 11:47 p.m. The reaction was immediate. Gasps from the audience. Someone's wine glass hitting the floor, the sound of chairs scraping as people turned to look at each other in shock. Marta stood frozen on stage, her mouth open, her face going pale under the lights. That's not, she stammered, frantically clicking her remote to advance to the next slide. The next slide was worse. Marta and Greg entering the Marriott, his hand on her lower back, both of them laughing. Then another. The two of them at an expensive restaurant downtown, holding hands across the table, while Greg fed her dessert. Turn it off, Greg shouted from somewhere in the audience. But the damage was done. The entire room had seen the evidence of their affair, projected in living color on a 12-foot screen. Marta finally managed to shut down her laptop, but the silence that followed was deafening. 200 of the most important people in the city had just watched her professional reputation go up in flames. I stood up slowly, still holding the roses I'd brought for her. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence, "I apologize for the technical difficulties. As Marta's husband, I feel I should explain what you just saw." "David, don't," Marta pleaded from the stage, but I was already walking toward the front of the room. "What you saw were photographs taken over the past several weeks documenting my wife's extramarital affair with her business partner, Greg Waters, an affair that she's been funding with our joint credit cards in hotels like this one, while lying to me and our children about where she was spending her evenings." The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning cycling on and off. Greg had disappeared, probably heading for the exit. Marta stood on the stage like a deer caught in headlights. "I want everyone here to know that I had nothing to do with this presentation malfunction," I continued. "I'm just as shocked as all of you to discover the truth about my wife's extracurricular activities. But since we're all here together, I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to announce that I've filed for divorce, and that Marta will no longer be speaking on behalf of our family." I walked up to the stage and held out the roses to my wife. She took them automatically, her hands shaking. "Congratulations on your new life, darling," I said quietly, just loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "I hope it's everything you dreamed it would be." Then I turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind the wreckage of Marta's career and the shocked murmurs of 200 witnesses to her downfall. The story hit the local news within hours, not because adultery was particularly newsworthy, but because the public nature of the revelation, combined with the prominent people who'd witnessed it, made it irresistible to the media. The headline in Saturday's paper read, "Marketing Executive's Affair Exposed at Client Event." By Monday morning, Marta had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into her use of company resources for personal matters. Greg had been suspended entirely, and several major clients had already called to express their concerns about continuing their relationships with the agency. I, meanwhile, had become something of a folk hero. My phone rang constantly, with calls from friends, acquaintances, and even strangers who'd heard about what happened. The consensus seemed to be that Marta had gotten what she deserved and that I'd handled the situation with remarkable restraint. "You could have done a lot worse," Trent observed when we met for lunch on Tuesday. "Could have punched Greg in the face, could have made a scene. Instead, you just let the truth speak for itself." "The truth was loud enough," I replied. "Did you see the video someone posted online? 500,000 views and counting. You're internet famous, buddy." The video, shot by someone in the audience on their phone, showed the moment the photographs appeared on screen and my subsequent speech. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive, with most people praising my dignity under pressure and condemning Marta's behavior. But the real consequences were just beginning. Patricia called that afternoon with an update on the divorce proceedings. "She wants to talk settlement," she said. "Her attorney called this morning. Apparently, she's willing to give you everything you asked for if you'll agree to a quick, quiet divorce. What's the catch?" "No catch. She's desperate to make this go away. The publicity has been devastating for her career, and she knows it's only going to get worse if this drags out in court." "What about Greg? What about him? His wife filed for divorce yesterday, and she's not being nearly as generous as Marta's trying to be. She wants half of everything, plus alimony, plus damages for emotional distress. He's going to be lucky if he keeps his car." The irony was perfect. Greg had been using Marta to fund his lifestyle, while his own marriage fell apart, and now both relationships were destroyed. He'd lost his wife, his job, and his financial security all in one weekend. But I wasn't satisfied yet. The public humiliation had been satisfying, but I wanted them to understand the full cost of their betrayal. I wanted them to feel the same helplessness I'd felt for months, watching my marriage crumble while pretending everything was fine. That's when I decided to get creative with the divorce settlement. "I want the house," I told Patricia, "all of it. And I want her to pay me alimony. David, be reasonable. You make more money than she does." "Not anymore. She's unemployed, remember? And likely to stay that way for a while. Her reputation in this town is shot. She's going to have trouble finding work anywhere in marketing or advertising." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "You're right," she said finally. "And given the adultery and misuse of marital funds, we can probably make a case for punitive alimony." "How much are you thinking?" "Enough to hurt," I want her to feel what it's like to struggle financially while someone else holds all the cards. The settlement negotiations took 2 weeks. Marta's attorney tried to push back on some of my demands, but the evidence of her affair and financial misconduct was too strong. In the end, she agreed to give me the house, both cars, and 70% of our joint assets. She also agreed to pay me $2,000 a month in alimony for 5 years. The final insult came when she had to move out of our house and into a small apartment across town. The same apartment complex where she'd been meeting Greg for their afternoon trysts. She'd gone from living in a 4-bedroom colonial in the best neighborhood in town to a 1-bedroom unit next to the highway. Greg, meanwhile, had lost everything. His wife took half his assets in their divorce. The advertising agency fired him and sued him for misappropriation of funds, and he was facing potential criminal charges for his questionable billing practices. The last I heard, he was working at a car dealership and living in his brother's basement. But the story wasn't over yet. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a call from Amelia. She was crying, which immediately put me on high alert. "Dad, it's Mom," she said. "She's in the hospital." My blood ran cold. "What happened? Is she okay?" "She overdosed. Pills and alcohol. Ross found her in her apartment this morning." Despite everything that had happened between us, despite the lies and the betrayal and the humiliation, Marta was still the mother of my children. She was still the woman I'd loved for 23 years. The thought of her lying in a hospital bed alone and desperate enough to try to end herself hit me harder than I'd expected. I met the kids at the hospital. Marta was stable, but unconscious. Her face pale and drawn under the harsh fluorescent lights. The doctor said it wasn't clear if it had been an intentional incident or an accidental overdose. But either way, she was lucky to be alive. "She's been struggling," Ross said quietly. "Can't find work, can't afford her apartment, can't handle the shame of what happened. She called me last week crying, saying she'd ruined everything and didn't know how to fix it." For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt a flicker of guilt. Had I gone too far? Had my need for revenge pushed her over the edge? Then I remembered the toast, the public humiliation, the months of lies, the credit card bills for hotels and dinners and gifts for another man. The image of Greg in my bedroom, in my bed, while my daughter could have walked in at any moment. No, I hadn't pushed her over the edge. She'd jumped off it herself the moment she decided to betray our marriage and our family. I just made sure she understood the consequences of her choices. Marta recovered physically, but the incident marked the end of her downward spiral. She moved back in with her sister Victoria, started seeing a therapist, and eventually found work at a small nonprofit organization making about a quarter of what she used to earn. She never tried to contact me directly, but she sent messages through the kids occasionally. Apologies for what she'd done, explanations for why she'd done it, requests for forgiveness that I wasn't ready to give. Greg disappeared entirely. Last I heard, he'd moved to another state to start over, leaving behind a trail of debt and broken relationships. As for me, I kept the house, kept my job, and slowly rebuilt my life. The kids visited regularly and eventually even brought their friends around. I started dating again, carefully this time, having learned some hard lessons about trust and betrayal. But the real victory wasn't financial or social. It was personal. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. I wasn't walking on eggshells, wasn't making excuses for someone else's behavior, wasn't pretending to be happy while my world crumbled around me. I was free. 2 years after the divorce, I thought the Marta chapter of my life was finally closed. I was wrong. It started with a phone call from Patricia on a Tuesday morning in March. Her voice had an edge to it that immediately put me on alert. "David, we need to talk. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" "What's this about?" "Marta's trying to have the divorce settlement overturned. She's claiming emotional duress and says you manipulated her into agreeing to terms she never would have accepted if she'd been thinking clearly." I felt the familiar surge of anger that I'd learned to control over the past 2 years. On what grounds? Mental health issues stemming from the public humiliation. Her new attorney is arguing that the presentation incident was so traumatic it impaired her judgment during the settlement negotiations. That's ridiculous. Maybe. But her hospitalization after the overdose gives them something to work with. They're painting a picture of a woman who was so psychologically damaged by your actions that she couldn't make rational decisions about her own future. I hung up and immediately called Trent. If Marta wanted to reopen old wounds, I was ready for her. We met at Patricia's office that afternoon along with Lila Stein, who'd kept all the evidence from our original investigation. The conference room felt like a war room as we spread documents and photographs across the large oak table. "What are our options?" I asked. "We fight it," Patricia said simply. "Her case is weak, but it's not frivolous. The judge might be sympathetic to claims of emotional distress, especially given the very public nature of how the affair was exposed. But we have evidence that she was the one who initiated the affair," Lila pointed out. "We have financial records showing she was stealing marital assets to fund it. We have testimony from your children about finding Greg in your bedroom. The judge has to consider that too." "True, but David, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you plan the presentation incident specifically to humiliate her?" I looked around the room at the three people who'd helped me through the darkest period of my life. They deserved the truth. "Yes," I said. "I wanted her to feel what I felt when she made that toast in front of our friends and family. I wanted her to understand that actions have consequences." Patricia nodded slowly. "Okay, that's what I thought. It doesn't change anything legally. She still committed adultery. She still stole marital funds. She still humiliated you first. But it does mean we need to be prepared for her to paint you as vindictive and calculating." "I was vindictive," I admitted. "I was also justified. The judge will have to decide that." The hearing was scheduled for the following month. In the meantime, Marta's attorney began a media campaign designed to rehabilitate her image and paint me as the villain. They gave interviews to local news stations describing Marta as a victim of emotional misuse who'd made mistakes but didn't deserve to be publicly destroyed. The narrative was compelling. Successful businesswoman has affair, husband discovers it and orchestrates elaborate revenge scheme that ruins her career and drives her to a desperate act of self-harm. When you stripped away all the context, it almost sounded sympathetic. But I had context, and I had evidence, and I had something else that Marta didn't expect: witnesses. The hearing took place on a Thursday morning in April. The courthouse was packed with reporters and curious onlookers, turning what should have been a private family matter into a public spectacle. Again. Marta's attorney went first, painting a picture of a woman who'd made a mistake but had been punished far beyond what the crime deserved. He called expert witnesses to testify about the psychological impact of public humiliation, brought in character witnesses to speak about Marta's contributions to the community, and even had Marta herself take the stand to tearfully apologize for her affair while describing the devastating impact of my revenge. It was a good performance. If I hadn't lived through the actual events, I might have been moved by it myself. Then it was our turn. Patricia started with the financial evidence, methodically laying out every hotel charge, every expensive dinner, every gift that Marta had purchased for Greg using our joint accounts. The numbers were staggering. Over $30,000 in 6 months, all spent on her affair while she complained to me about our household budget. Next came the photographs and audio recordings, played for the judge in the packed courtroom. Marta and Greg planning their next rendezvous, laughing about how clueless I was, discussing their future together once they both got divorced. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source: Greg himself. Lila had tracked him down in Phoenix, where he was working at a struggling marketing firm and living in a studio apartment. She'd convinced him to testify via video link, and his testimony was devastating. Marta was the one who pursued me," he said, his face appearing on the large screen at the front of the courtroom. "She made it clear that she was unhappy in her marriage and was looking for a way out. She said David was boring and predictable and that she deserved better." "Did she ever express concern about the financial cost of your relationship?" Patricia asked. "No, she said David made good money and wouldn't miss what she was spending. She actually bragged about making him pay for our dates without him knowing it." "Did you discuss divorce?" "She talked about it constantly. She had this whole plan worked out. She was going to take him for everything she could get. Then we'd combine our resources and start our own agency. She was very calculating about it." "Did she seem emotionally distressed or mentally impaired during any of these conversations?" "Not at all. She was sharp, focused, completely in control. The only time I saw her get upset was after the presentation incident, when she realized her plan had backfired." The courtroom was silent as Greg's testimony ended. Marta sat at her attorney's table, tears streaming down her face, but they looked more like tears of rage than remorse. Finally, Patricia called me to the stand. Mr. Monroe, did you plan to expose your wife's affair at her company's client event? Yes. Why? I looked out at the packed courtroom, at the reporters scribbling notes, at Marta sitting 20 feet away from me. Then I thought about that night 2.5 years ago, standing in my own dining room, while my wife publicly humiliated me in front of our children and friends. Because she humiliated me first, I said simply. She stood in our dining room, in front of our kids and our guests, and made a toast mocking our marriage and my ability to satisfy her as a husband. She did it deliberately, cruelly, and publicly. I wanted her to understand how that felt. Do you regret your actions? I considered the question carefully. Did I regret the pain Marta had suffered? The loss of her career, her financial struggles, even her hospitalization? On some level, yes. Despite everything she'd done, I didn't take pleasure in her suffering. But did I regret exposing the truth about her affair? Did I regret making sure she faced consequences for her betrayal? Did I regret refusing to be a victim? No, I said, I don't regret it. She made choices, and those choices had consequences. I didn't create those consequences, I just made sure she couldn't hide from them. The judge took a recess to consider the evidence. When court reconvened an hour later, his decision was swift and decisive. This court finds no grounds to overturn the original divorce settlement, he said. While the circumstances surrounding the revelation of Mrs. Monroe's affair were undoubtedly embarrassing, they do not constitute grounds for claiming mental incapacity during the settlement negotiations. The evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Monroe was fully aware of her actions and their potential consequences throughout the period in question. He looked directly at Marta. Miss Monroe, you committed adultery, you misused marital funds to support that adultery, and you publicly humiliated your husband. The fact that he chose to expose your behavior in an equally public manner may seem harsh, but it does not invalidate the settlement you agreed to. Your petition is denied. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent courtroom. As people began filing out, Marta's attorney gathered his papers with the resigned efficiency of someone who'd known he was fighting a losing battle. Marta herself sat motionless for a long moment, before finally standing and walking toward the exit. She paused as she passed my table, leaning down to whisper something I almost couldn't hear. I hope you're happy now. I looked up at her, this woman I'd loved for more than half my adult life, this stranger who'd shared my bed and raised my children and ultimately betrayed everything we'd built together. I'm not happy, I said quietly, but I'm free, and that's enough. She straightened up and walked away, and I knew with absolute certainty that I would never see her again. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions that I ignored. Trent and Lila flanked me as we walked to the parking garage, their presence a reminder that I hadn't fought this battle alone. So what now? Trent asked as we reached my car. Now I go home, I said. I make dinner, I watch the news, I live my life. Sounds boring. I smiled as I unlocked my car door. Boring sounds perfect. That evening, I sat on my back deck with a beer and watched the sun set over the neighborhood I'd fought to keep. My phone buzzed occasionally with messages from friends and family, but I ignored them all. There would be time for conversations tomorrow. Tonight, I just wanted to enjoy the silence. The next morning brought one final surprise. A text message from an unknown number. Saw the news. You handled yourself with class. Proud of you. Ross. My son, who I hadn't heard from in months, who'd been caught in the middle of his parents' ugly divorce, who'd watched his family fall apart in the most public way possible. He was proud of me. I typed back, "Thanks, son. Love you." His response came immediately. "Love you too, Dad. See you soon." And for the first time in 3 years, I felt truly, completely happy.